The idea of the half-orc does not come from real-world history in the literal sense, but its roots stretch deep into ancient human fears, myths, and cultural memories of the other, a being caught between civilization and savagery, humanity and monstrosity. And when you trace its origins, what you uncover is something far darker than fantasy, something that feels disturbingly real. As if buried somewhere in forgotten history, there were whispers of beings who did not fully belong to either side. Long before modern fantasy, early tribal societies told stories of unions between humans and wild, brutal entities, sometimes described as forest demons, war spirits, or cursed warriors, beings that resembled men but carried exaggerated strength, distorted faces, and an unnatural rage. And in many Indo-European and Central Asian oral traditions, there are eerie references to half-blood warriors, children born after violent raids, where invaders from unknown lands mixed with local populations, leaving behind offspring who were feared for their appearance and unpredictable behavior. These children were often abandoned, exiled, or raised in isolation, which only fueled the belief that they were inherently dangerous, and over time, these stories evolved into legends of hybrid beings who were stronger than men but lacked their morality, a theme that echoes disturbingly in medieval European folklore where wild men of the woods, described as hulking, tusk-like toothed creatures with human intelligence but animalistic instincts, were said to sometimes abduct women, resulting in cursed offspring who were neither fully human nor fully beast. In ancient Mesopotamian myths, there are accounts of beings like Enkidu, created as a wild man of nature, who symbolize the thin line between civilization and primal chaos, and while not an orc, his story reflects the same psychological fear, the existence of something that looks human but belongs to a darker, untamed world. As history moved into the brutal ages of conquest, especially during the Mongol invasions and other large-scale wars, enemy forces were often demonized in exaggerated descriptions, depicted as monstrous, savage, almost inhuman creatures who slaughtered without mercy, and in some chronicles, these invaders were described with grotesque features, broad faces, protruding teeth, immense size, turning real humans into something mythological, something closer to what we now imagine as orcs. And when these invasions resulted in mixed offspring, especially in regions torn by violence, those children were sometimes stigmatized, feared, and labeled as cursed hybrids, reinforcing the archetype of the half-orc as an outcast from birth. In South Asian and Middle Eastern folklore, there are also chilling tales of jinn or demonic entities forming relationships with humans, producing children with unusual physical traits and supernatural strength, beings who were said to possess violent tempers and an eerie connection to the unseen world, and these stories were often used as warnings, but they also mirror the same unsettling concept, a hybrid existence that should not be possible. Moving into later centuries, the idea of the half-orc became more defined through literature, especially in the dark imagination of writers who drew from ancient fears and gave them a more structured form, portraying orcs as brutal, war-driven creatures and half-orcs as tragic figures caught between two worlds, hated by humans for their monstrous blood and rejected by orcs for their weakness. And while this modern depiction is fictional, it resonates so strongly because it taps into something deeply human, the fear of identity, the fear of being neither accepted nor understood, the fear that something violent and uncontrollable exists within. Psychologically, the half-orc represents the internal conflict between reason and rage, civilization and instinct, and this is why the concept feels so real because throughout history, humans have struggled with their own dual nature, capable of both great compassion and unimaginable brutality, and in many ways, the half-orc is not just a creature of myth, but a reflection of humanity itself, exaggerated into a physical form. There are even anthropological theories suggesting that ancient encounters between early humans and other hominid species, such as Neanderthals, may have inspired myths of hybrid beings, as these encounters would have produced individuals who looked different enough to be perceived as something other, something unsettling, especially in societies that did not understand genetics, and these individuals might have been seen as living proof of forbidden unions between different kinds of beings. Over time, as societies became more structured and less tolerant of differences, the idea of the half-orc shifted from a mysterious anomaly to a symbol of danger and moral corruption, often used in stories to represent the consequences of crossing boundaries that should not be crossed, whether those boundaries were social, cultural, or even supernatural. In darker interpretations, half-orcs are not just born from union but from violence, from war, from acts that carry trauma, which adds another layer of horror to their existence, making them not just outsiders but living reminders of something terrible that happened in the past. And this is where the concept becomes truly chilling, because it suggests that the half-orc is not just a fantasy race, but a narrative built on real human experiences: war, prejudice, fear of the unknown, and the struggle for identity, twisted and amplified into something monstrous, something that refuses to be forgotten. And if you look closely at the oldest stories, the fragmented myths, the exaggerated historical accounts, you begin to feel that the half-orc is less of an invention and more of a shadow, a distorted echo of something that may have once existed in the darkest corners of human history, something that people tried to erase, to bury under layers of myth and fantasy. But the stories never truly disappeared, they only changed form, evolving into the creatures we know today. And perhaps the most terrifying part is not whether half-orcs ever physically existed, but why the idea of them has persisted for so long, why across cultures and centuries humans keep imagining the same thing. A being that looks like us but carries something brutal and inhuman inside, something that cannot be controlled, something that reminds us that the line between man and monster is far thinner than we want to believe.